Retail and hospitality are much more than places we shop, dine, and stay. They're a critical part of our economy here in the Tri-Cities. Together, these industries employ thousands of people, support tourism and community events, and help create a quality of life that makes our region an attractive place to live. At the same time, this industry is navigating increasingly complex landscape, workforce shortages, rising costs, changing consumer expectations, and public policy. That's why we're so pleased to have today's speakers with us to help us better understand the issues shaping these industries across Washington. In just a few minutes, we'll hear from Anton, the President and CEO of the Washington Hospitality Association, and Crystal Leatherman, the Director of Policy and Government Affairs with the Washington Retail Association. Next, I'm going to turn things over to Tori Azure, our board chair, who's going to take us through the rest of our program. Please help me welcome Tori.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Lori. Our first presenter is Anton, President and CEO of the Washington Hospitality Association. Anthony has led the Washington Hospitality Association for more than 20 years, growing it into one of the 3 largest hospitality associations in the nation. He has served on more than 20 industry and community boards, and in 2023 was inducted into Washington State University's School of Hospitality Business Management Hall of Fame. Raised in a family with more than 70 years of hospitality experience in Washington, he brings both personal and professional passion to the work. If you could all please help me welcome Anton.
I tend to be a loud guy, so am I screaming at you? My wife's like, never get too close to the mic because people start shrinking away from me. I'm going to stand over here where I can see my screen a little bit. You'll be one of the first public audiences who's seen our annual State of the Industry that's not industry specific. So later, I'd love to hear from you if this was helpful to understand the industry or if I really became too nerdy and too statistical based and I should mix it up a little bit. So is it okay for my test audience? Is that all right? Everyone good with that? Back of the room? Okay. The information you're going to see today is we gather a ton of industry stats, banking stats, and then I travel around the state in the first half of the year, and we traveled to 15 different cities. In each city, we met with quick service operators, full service operators, and hoteliers. We did a partnership with Visit Tri-Cities and Tri-Cities Chamber, and heard from about 40 operators here in the Tri-Cities. So what you're seeing is a lot of information directly from operators, real-life operators, combined with a lot of industry stats to truly get a feel for where our industry sits. One of the tough things to hear from those operators we went around the state and talked to is they really felt these are maybe the toughest times we've seen, even including COVID. And I'll be honest with you, Tri-Cities was probably the most optimistic of the 15 cities that I visited, but even in that meeting, many people are feeling like the industry model itself is now broken. And even when the economy recovers, or wherever we're at, we're probably at a point where the best we can do in this state is tread water without some kind of dynamic change. I think even the more shocking number is only 2% of all those 300 operators I talked to felt like the industry is doing well. And when you look at, we have 16,000 restaurants in Washington and over 1,000 hotels, just the law of large numbers would tell you, okay, somebody's doing okay, but that is a very low number. So I think it gives you a sense of the challenge that operators are feeling right now. My first 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to walk through the restaurant side of the industry, and then I'm going to pause, breathe, and then go through the lodging side of the industry. I'm going to start off kind of where we feel, and operators are telling me we've got a recipe for disaster in our hands right now. Washington's profit margins for restaurants are the lowest in the country and 60% lower than the national average. So national average is about 4%, and Washington's profit margin is 1.5%. One of the first times I gave this speech, there was a really nice Methodist minister in the audience, and afterwards she's like, "What's the net margin?" Because she didn't live by that. So I realized I added a slide so you could really understand what that meant. If you're working 60 hours a week in your restaurant, chasing your dream, doing the best you can, and you're doing average, the average restaurant in Washington location does about $1.1 million. So your profit, your take home, you're trying to make this work is about $16,000. That's the challenge that operators, if you see them and they're stressed and why is that person dealing with so much, that's where we're at. Well, if your margins are low, just raise your prices. You probably saw the report that came out last year. We have. Washington has the highest menu prices in the country. And what operators are really feeling is that customer pushback, that you've raised prices so much that I'm questioning, do I stay for that extra drink? Do I go out that extra time? We've tried to raise our prices to reflect what Washington is, and the customers are kind of hitting their high end. Even more troubling is our expenses keep going up. So between labor costs, insurance costs, and cost of goods, they're rising at a rate for our industry much higher than inflation. And so we're hitting a cap of where we can raise our prices to. We already have the lowest margins in the country, and we're seeing inflation continue to grow. 6 out of 10 operators in Washington reported fewer guests in 2025. And this is where I was getting to earlier. If you look at public polling, we're now at a point where 72% of guests feel like restaurants have gotten too expensive. And 60% of them are actively trading down or changing their patterns because of restaurant pricing. I don't want to make this too dark. There's positive things coming, I swear. We're seeing challenges in particularly in Washington State. We're heavily Canadian-based, and we see a lot of Canadian travel, and we're down 26% on Canadian travel. We're also seeing changes in younger guests that are creating some interesting issues. Alcohol use is just different. I think a lot of operators are like, wow, my bar at 10 o'clock on 11 o'clock on Friday used to be filled with young folks, and now we're pretty much empty at 10:30 at night because changes in styles of generations have shifted. I think it's really interesting when you look at the percentage of alcohol consumption. 76% or 70% is in the older generation, and only 4% is in that 21 to 25% generation. I think that's a big flip from when I grew up at WSU. But it's a change, and things are changing, and I think it impacts the model, and how do we deal with it? We're also, for the first time for years, we were seeing people become more and more dependent on restaurants. And we're seeing that growth of restaurants are not the option that we thought they were in the 60s. When the economy get tight, we'll just cut back. Because I still have to go pick up my kid from soccer and then figure out how to get my other kid from over here. And I haven't had time to make meal because both parents work or there's one parent. I have to eat. And 66% of folks, and it was climbing for years, feel like restaurants are a necessity. It's not this optional thing I can just cut when times get tough. For the first time in a decade, we've seen a generation drop in restaurants being an essential part of their life. The other thing that's really, really challenging, and you hear from a lot of operators, is currently, if every legislator could be like Senator Dozier and some of the representatives in this room, the slide would look different. We're really blessed to have the legislators we have out of this area. Thank you. But we need more of you. And the problem is because we don't have more folks who understand that economies and jobs and quality of life all tie together, we were really struggling with the growth of lawsuits, regulations, crime and safety issues, labor laws that are really driving costs. And so you combine all these things together and we have a recipe for disaster. If we do nothing and the margins we're at, we're probably looking at a drop of about 9% of the state's restaurants. It's about 1,400, 1,500 fewer restaurants. Restaurants turn over all the time. I think we all know that location that was a pho, then it was a Korean place, and then it was an Indian place. I'm not talking about turnover. I'm talking about net fewer opening buildings when you look across the system. To avoid this, restaurants have to come up with a way, we as an industry, we as a community, to cut costs by about $35,000 per million or increase sales by about $75,000 per million. To avoid the one, this is the economic challenge that people are turning puzzle pieces and trying to figure out how do we do this and how does this happen. That was the negative. We wouldn't stay in business if there wasn't hope, and so we got to turn that recipe for disaster into a recipe for success. One of the big things, we have a 40% labor market. I think my dad grew up in the restaurant industry when it was closer to 32%. If you graduated from WSU in hospitality, to anyone in the room, you probably got taught a third, 33% labor costs. So in Washington, because of a lot of the labor costs and regulations we have, we're now over 40%. And so people will be looking at how do we do it different? How do we change our labor model to make restaurants more affordable and get the margins where I can actually make a living at this? And it's an active conversation that's occurring daily with about every operator I talk to. A part of that conversation is going to be tipping. There was a really interesting stat report that just came out from one of the major accounting firms. Washington servers average $44.72 an hour in 2025, according to their tax returns. So when we think of servers as minimum wage, the reality is the majority of their income is coming from tips, and if you look at what they report net at the end of the day, it's a good income. But we keep raising the wages, and we have now seen a drop of 20% of the number of servers. As we're trying to keep things affordable and trying to keep things manageable, we're seeing fewer of our best paying jobs in the industry because we can no longer afford them. We've got to meet a changing customer, so we have to rethink the alcohol model. It used to be that a lot of operators made their money off the alcohol sale. That's no longer going to be a reality. So how do we think differently? How do we do mocktails? How do we think creatively? How do we come up with something that can be profitable outside of alcohol if future generations are just drinking it less and less? And the good news is Gen Z and millennials are saying they're willing to pay more money for these creative ideas. And so there's hope within how do we remanage that. How do we meet the changing customer in the way they go? I'm guessing the older folks in the room don't love to scan the QR code when they come in the restaurant and order folks. I know my uncle really hates that. But the younger folks actually expect it. My kids grab their phones, start doing it, and start looking at the menu prices immediately. So how do we deal with the changing generations and a younger generation that's more comfortable with the technology that became adapted quicker as a way to get to profitability? I think AI is going to be a huge part of where we're at. I was really surprised when we were meeting with those 40-some operators in Tri-Cities, how many are already way down the road in engaging AI as a way to get healthier. And I think that's just going to become a stronger and stronger thing. As an independent operator who doesn't have an HR director, doesn't have a lawyer on staff, doesn't have a procurement person, it's them. How do they use AI as a thinking partner to make smarter and faster decisions? And marketing's got to change. I saw Jillian in the audience. Where are you at? She's our old marketing communications person from the association, and she's outstanding. And you work now here in the Tri-Cities. It was so great to see you. You know this better than anyone. Marketing's got to change, and it's got to tell a story, and it's got to tell a story that's personal. And how do we make our business more than the storefront, but a part of the community and tell a personal story? So we need that marketing support and creative thinking to get ourselves engaged differently. I'm running up on my time here on the restaurant side. The last part of this is we got to re-engage in the community. I think for a long time, operators started focusing inside the house, and I think that we've developed a disconnect with our communities. And because of that, when legislation or ideas or things pass out in the community, there's not that true connection to their operator. And so 84% of operators are willing to rethink how we engage and get more involved here in the chambers, more out telling their story about why it's so difficult in the industry. And we do need a new relationship with government. It can't be adversarial, it can't be us versus them. These are our communities. We can't move restaurants to North Carolina and serve you a burger here. We can't move our fry manufacturing to China. We're here. We're gonna be here, and we succeed when this community succeeds. So how do we do this differently, and how do we work together to make our community stronger? We need a different relationship to make that happen. So combined, that's kind of the recipe for success we want to pursue on the restaurant side. We know we have a challenge. We know the times in front of us are dark. But those are some of the creative ideas and many more that Lori and others are going to help us kind of talk through. How does our industry get from here to somewhere else? On the lodging side, a lot of similar stories. I talked about tourism being down. A lot of people asked about World Cup. World Cup was a wonderful thing. In no way will I ever say it was negative. It gave our region a postcard that was fantastic. But then I'll talk to some folks, I'm like, well, that was a gold mine. You're not going to have to sell anything else for 2 years. That isn't really the true story of World Cup. World Cup was amazing. It was great. People all over the world saw our beautiful Puget Sound and Washington State area. But net, most people were down through World Cup. People avoided traveling to Seattle during those 2 months that normally would have. Businesses canceled conventions and other things in those areas because they were worried about World Cup traffic. There were other things that were going on, and we didn't get the best draw as far as massive. The Scots that drank people empty in Boston, the Bosnia Herzegovinians didn't do that in Seattle. So the mesh of the team that we got in the Puget Sounds were just different. So World Cup was awesome and wonderful, but not a gold mine. It's a long-term play for wonderful advertising. Occupancy is down across the state, ADR and RevPAR. RevPAR is the number one metric for hotels. If you look at average daily rate, you'll see that we've not been able to demand the average daily rate in Washington that our other western states have done or across the country. And when we have rising costs and we're not able to secure that same kind of price, it creates a challenge. A lot of the same prices on challenges on pricing. But one I want to pause on is this stat, which I think is really interesting. Most of the hotels you see that you drive by are not corporate. In fact, very few are. They're all an independent franchisee who bought a dream, and they got a big loan on that dream. 71% of hotel loans are in the technical term of critical stress, and they are really challenged of how they're even going to make it in the next round of loans and next round of payments and their debt service moving forward. We're also seeing a changing market in hotels. While boomers prefer hotels over restaurants, hotels over vacation rentals, Gen Z is almost the flip number of that. And Gen Z is much more open to staying in a vacation rental than in a hotel. And so how do we have to change in the changing dynamic of a customer? And then the same challenges with government. We need more people like we have here in the Tri-Cities because we have to rethink this effort. So that's our recipe for a disaster on the hotel side. Again, I hate being negative. I'm one of those optimistic people. And so how do we turn this around? Well, one of the things that's already happened, Senator Dozier is actually one of the prime people who helped this, but we've established for the first time in 20 years a Washington State Tourism Office. So Senator, thank you for all your work and others who voted for that bill. But Washington is one of the only states in the country who's not been spreading the good news of tourism around the country. And so Idaho spends, I'm not remembering the number off the top of my head, but close to $12 million a year marketing Idaho. In Washington, we spend about $1 million a year. To just give you a sense of where people are going, and when you drive around and you see like the buses from Montana or a television ad to visit California, we're not doing that in all those other states to say, how do we help drive our economy here? But we now have a bill to do that, and we're working really hard to now move that bill forward so the funding starts coming in. So the bill is passed, and this tourism assessment is going to be a really great thing for the industry moving forward. Continue to really engage AI as a help and as a partner, as a think, is part of our model. Also, technology. More and more people are willing to use technology as part of hospitality. Technology doesn't have to take away from hospitality. But how do we do it, and how do we modernize that guest experience? A lot of people have bought systems, but they've actually only used partial of their systems. And so how do they integrate their systems fully? I was at a national show, and that is an automatic vacuum cleaner that people can roll out each night. So the vacuums can just roll out, vacuum the entire lobbies, hotels, otherwise. It's kind of like a commercial Roomba, which saves hours and hours of other people doing it and can vacuum more often. It's big enough and safe enough to move. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm saying these ideas are here like never before. Our newest board member has robot bartenders, and has 2 of them. And these ideas, at the end of the day, when you have no other options, can save time and cost. Shifting traveler preferences. I talked about the shifting on the negative side of younger generations away from hotels, but the good news is a lot of them believe that hotels offer better services and better value than short-term rentals. So if we can make this experience personal, we can turn that around. Those numbers have hope when you look at them. I mentioned this earlier. How do we turn around our operational systems and fully integrate? Most operators only use about 45% of their existing system's potential. How do they get it all the way through to the investment that they made? And really helping people understand this. I think people drive by a hotel, and maybe I think this and it's not true, but they're like, well, that's nice, but that's a corporation, not really fully understanding it's probably owned by a local franchisee like A1 Hospitality. Every person who spends $100 in that hotel spends $234 out in the community each day they're in the area. They go out and they experience something in the community, they buy a couple of meals, they hit some retail shops, they do some other things. So every guest that comes into town is spending twice as much in the community. And that generates over $2.4 billion in wages and a lot of jobs. So how do we help people better understand that? Just like the restaurants, hotels know that we need to do a better job of working outside the building and engaging the community at a higher level. And we just need, as a business community, holistically, a different relationship with government. So I'd love your feedback. I'm coming up on my time, and there'll be some times for questions and answers, but we know we have the tough times. We know we've got some recipes for disaster in our hands, but how do we work together? How do the chambers and other folks try to figure out new ways to do business so we can come out this other time and have a recipe for success? Thank you so much for your time. Please go watch the YouTube videos on the full, and we love being part of this community, so thanks for having me.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Crystal Leatherman, Director of Policy and Government Affairs with the Washington Retail Association. Crystal Leatherman champions the interests of retailers of all sizes across Washington state, bringing a practical, results-driven approach to some of the most complex issues facing the retail industry today, including public safety, retail theft, consumer protection, data privacy, artificial intelligence, and taxation. She has been instrumental in advancing major legislative priorities for Washington retailers, including reforms to the state's commercial electronic mail act, and ongoing advocacy around retail theft prevention. Her work is grounded in belief that retailers are not only vital employers and key economic contributors, but also essential community partners. Please help me welcome Crystal Leatherman.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Is that good? Okay, I also talk really loud and I also talk really fast, so if I'm talking too fast, please just flag me, let me know. So good afternoon, thank you so much for the Chamber for having me today. I want to treat this more like a conversation, so if there are things that I say during my presentation where you have a question immediately, like I do have a question slide at the end, please feel free to save your questions for then, but also as we're discussing, I want to treat this like a discussion, a conversation amongst friends. Feel free to raise your hand and happy to have dialogue as we go through the presentation. So my goal for this presentation is obviously I'm talking about the retail industry, the state of the retail industry, both nationally and in Washington state, but I also want to try to be able to frame this a little bit more broadly for how this shapes and informs broader business industries and the health of broader industries because of what we're seeing in the retail industry. So first, I want to say that retail is what I would consider the canary in the coal mine. There was a report that just came out where it stated that Washington State had a highest growth GPD for the first quarter in 2026. And while that may be true, there's always an asterisk to that. When you read into what that report was stating, and I think even Governor Ferguson cited that report as stating that our economy is booming, that is highly focused on the tech sector boom, which is consolidated and condensed in your Seattle corridor. It was also talking about products and goods and services that get exported out of our state to service others across the country as well as internationally. Where retail and even hospitality, especially hospitality, what they signal is not just how the state of the economy is, but the health of the economy, because that is your day-to-day. Those are your interactions with how your neighbors are feeling the pinch when it comes to managing their finances, or the additional burdens and tax increases that they're experiencing that trickle down through costs and goods and things that we see from the legislature that pass on down. First, I want to say with the headline, retail is one of the most resilient industries. We've seen it ebb and flow over the years. I know that especially during COVID, people really thought that the brick and mortar retail establishment was going to go away, and that online was going to be the big boom. Right now, retail is nationally pretty healthy. They projected $5.6 trillion in US sales, and then Washington did $146 billion retail sales in 2024. So if you've been hearing gloom and doom headlines about retail or that retail is dying, like, put those aside. But the word I want you to focus on is the word selective. Retailers are selective about what communities they enter into because they want to make sure that it is a thriving neighborhood, a thriving city, thriving county, for them to be able to set up shop and make that investment in the community through hiring, both directly and indirectly, and also the taxes and other resources that they offer and provide to the communities. I also want to say that consumers are going to be really selective about where they give their money to, because again, as pennies get a little tighter, as your checkbook, like, you're really looking at every single dollar and cent that goes in and out of your account, you're going to be really selective about where you spend your money. So let's talk about who retailers are selling to today. Part of the reason I'm really grateful that I got to go right after Anthony is that Anthony did a lot of the groundwork. So this, like, just helps reaffirm talking about, like, your Gen Z shopper, your millennial shopper, and then now the emerging generation alpha shopper. So a few things about today's shopper: they are purchasing earlier and earlier than traditionally what you've seen in the past. So with school, like, how many people in the room are parents and doing back to school shopping or getting prepared for it? Right. Generally, back to school shopping happens maybe a month to 2 weeks before school starts. What we're seeing now is that back to school shopping begins as early as June and even July because they're trying to time their purchases. The other thing too is, when we talk about sales, I think a lot of people think that there's a large boom in online sales, or that's where primarily a lot of the shopping is conducted. It's actually in brick and mortar shops. People want to go into the stores and they want to look at the product. They want to hold up those pants. Again, raise of hands, how many parents have taken a pair of pants against their kid's waist to make sure that it'll fit and that they can grow into it? Exactly. The other thing is that consumers are also more technology advanced, and they're getting more savvy with AI. They're utilizing AI in a way that benefits them. So I used to regularly read online reviews about products. I would go in and read the highest, the 5 stars, and the lowest to just kind of get a sense. Now that's kind of being replaced by AI summaries. So AI summaries, a lot of online retailers are implementing these tools to improve the consumer experience, to be able to aggregate and then summarize what consumers are saying so that you can be on the lookout for, oh, they might like the fit, but some say it size is small. Or this runs a little large, you might want to size down. Like, that is really helpful information, especially if you're a busy parent, busy in your day-to-day. So one of the things that are affecting my members, and I think probably even more broadly other industries as well, is tariffs. We are a trade-intensive state, so we get hit on both sides of the tariffs, both on imports and exports. So whether that's for Tri-City specifically, it's wine, wheat, or apples, you are possibly feeling the pinch of that, both on what gets exported out of the state and then what gets imported in. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, guys. The thing that I would recommend, this is advice that we're seeing from the National Retail Federation, the Retail Industry Leaders Association, is especially for your smaller mom and pop shops, your small businesses, as you're planning your sales, especially around your busy seasons to try to start talking with your vendors sooner so that you can start planning what those price increases are likely to be. Also, maybe set up your contracts in a way where you have a little bit of flexibility on being able to have a variety in who your vendors are, and then also start communicating that there's likely to be some price increases to your consumers. I do believe that the consumer today, in addition to being very tech savvy, they value a level of transparency, because, especially if they're going into your store, because they're building that connection with you. That builds trust, and just giving them like a heads up, like, hey, we are likely to see some price increases. So we're gonna go over a few retail myths and facts. So first, you might hear the thing that retail is dying. It's not. We're seeing retail sales expected to grow 4.4%. What they're saying that nobody shops local anymore. That is in fact not true. People are craving and yearning for a third space. They're yearning for a place to congregate. Again, I think that COVID, especially during COVID, where everybody was stuck inside, you had to social distance, for a lot of people, they thought that was going to signal the end of a number of retail establishments in other locations. We've seen a boom since COVID where people want to go out. They want to connect with others. They want to have experiences in person. They don't want to just rely on ordering something online and not being able to get that human-to-human interaction. I know there were a couple questions when it came to AI, about the idea about, is AI replacing is AI going to replace entire workforces? For retail and hospitality, they're probably the most protected when it comes to any type of AI job replacement. And that's, again, because you're dealing directly with the consumer. You are one-to-one with the consumer. People value that a good quality customer service experience. Whether you are going to a restaurant and you enjoy, the waiter with when you go to dinner, or when you're checking out with, your groceries, you value a quality customer service experience. These are the jobs that are the most protected. Now, I will say these are also the industries, especially retail, the fastest and most likely to adopt AI and implementing AI into their industry and into their business operations, not to replace their worker, but to aid and assist their worker. And then there are also other reasons. There are cost-effective reasons why you might start implementing tools, especially when it comes to AI, because, again, we'll get to it a little bit later, but just the regulatory landscape as well as like the tax landscape for businesses and just doing business in Washington State in general. And then again, I cited that report that had come out earlier that Washington's business climate is fine, taxes aside. And unfortunately, that is not true. I think that this is me speaking and preaching to the choir. I feel that just again, for a show of hands, how many businesses or business owners are you feeling like the pinch and the hit of like the tax increases over the past couple years? Like, are you feeling the pinch or like tightening your margins? So yeah, there's quite a few. So Washington State, unfortunately, is 45th out of 50 when we come to overall rank by the Tax Foundation. We also, unfortunately, passed one of the largest tax packages in our state's history. $9 billion is what we saw in increased taxes, increased and new taxes. And then we also have a large percentage of business leaders who are thinking of relocating themselves or relocating their entire business, either consolidating their footprint in the state or removing it altogether. So this is an additional problem that I think is very unique to any business or any city or county that exists along state lines, especially Oregon state line. Oregon does not have a sales tax. So what we are hearing from our members who they are what we'd consider a border business, whether it's here in the Tri-Cities or in Vancouver, you have a lot of customers because they're going to be more selective and discerning, and they're also looking at their pocketbook and just deciding what can they realistically afford. A lot of the big ticket dollar items, they will go across state lines if it's only an hour drive or less to be able to go and purchase to avoid some of the about 10% sales tax. So we're thinking your appliances, we're thinking, again, back to school shopping. If you have a large family that you need to purchase clothing for, any jewelry items, anything that doesn't necessarily need to be registered, like, with the exception of maybe vehicles, there may be a little bit here and there because once you register it, you have to pay your taxes here. A lot of the other big household purchases that you need, they are taking it across the state line. So Oregon leakage is a real problem. I'm not sure, if you are a business that operates in goods, you might be feeling this as well, especially if it's like real specialty or niche items. This is the other additional cost of doing business in Washington State. We have a very complex regulatory landscape just across the spectrum. So one of our biggest issues in our state is organized retail crime and then just pervasive retail theft. This statistic, so again, keep in mind, our legislature just passed a $9 billion tax package. Wild. In 2021, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they have this website, and I'm happy to share the link with you. I can share it after. They have an entire organized retail crime data dashboard that compares all the states, and then you can break it down to a granular level of what is happening in each state. In 2021, Washington State had almost $3 billion worth of goods stolen, which accounts for $600 million of lost tax revenue. For being a state that is reliant on sales tax, to not take the organized retail crime as seriously as it is, that is very alarming. We also have new taxes, new tax increases. Our industry tends to get hit a lot with what we call discriminatory taxes. So if there is a policy area that a lawmaker may be really passionate about, if they're trying to find revenue and they're not going to go through the traditional budget, the operating budget route, they may try to pass policy that implements a new tax or fee onto select products and services. We see this pretty frequently in our industry, especially when we're talking about digital equity and making sure that people have access to, wireless devices, especially kids. We have seen policy come through year after year where they want to implement an additional fee on top of wireless devices that connect to the internet. Like, that is how granular that it gets. And then on top of all the other costs of doing business, we get hit hard with those specialty policy proposals, as well as environmental regulation, extended producer responsibility. I don't know if anybody is familiar with what that is. Senator Banky is. So, this is where it's assigning, it's a reimagining of our recycling and waste system. And while I think that there is a lot of value and benefit in being able to advance certain proposals or policies like this, you can be in support of what the overarching goal is, but the path to get there can be very, very costly. And unfortunately, those costs, retailers running a business, they can only absorb so much of those costs before they get passed on to the consumer. So the consumer at the end still pays the price. And then, of course, we're seeing a significant uptick in AI and tech regulation. With AI, I think a lot of this policy area and just the technology in general is misunderstood. I think part of that, I blame Terminator for the decades and decades of building up propaganda that the robots are going to take over the world, but we can have a discussion about that later. But we're seeing a huge uptick in AI regulation, and the way that AI is being defined or what they're trying to regulate doesn't actually get at the heart of what the issue is that they're doing. It just makes it harder to run your business. Again, being able to implement these technologies and tools to be able to run more efficiently. And then, of course, we have other regulatory costs. I will not bore you guys, but if you are a policy nerd like me, I'm happy to chat with you after this to talk over all the special niche policy areas. So this is a quick, at a glance, what the wage map looks like in Washington State. So again, we already have the nation's highest minimum wage statewide. But then the additional burden that what we are experiencing is we're seeing a patchwork of different locations where they are raising the minimum wage bar, or they're being very selective about what industries get hit. Of course, I don't mean to be like a me too, but hospitality and retail tend to be the targets for these types of minimum wage increase proposals, which makes it very, very hard, especially for your smaller businesses. Anybody that has less than 50 full-time employees makes it harder for you to run your day-to-day operations. We have unfortunately, a significantly high unemployment rate. I just read a report literally this morning from ESD where I think we're at 5.2% when the nationwide unemployment rate is 4.2%. Things like this are not helping that issue. It's forcing business owners to have to make the decision, do I keep my 50 full-time employees or do I need to consolidate it to 45? That means 5 people are potentially out of a job, not because they want to take that job away from these employees, but they are trying to keep their doors open as well. So how many people have struggled to fill a role within their organization in the past 60 days? All right. Okay, so this next slide is going to kind of help support that. Staffing squeeze is very real, even in retail. There was a report done, 78% of retailers struggle to fill store labor gaps within the past 60 days. And then we're seeing a sharp decrease in seasonal jobs. So retail is very much a seasonal friendly employer. You see it during the holiday season. When I used to work in retail, they'd call it those are like the blackout dates. So if you worked regularly, you could not request time off during that time frame because holiday season is busy season. And you're seeing a decrease, nearly 100,000 jobs less because of just how difficult it is to hire and find somebody to retain them. And then again, 0% of these jobs, especially in the retail employee to customer facing roles, 0% of them have been replaced by AI. So like, again, I think that it is fair to be concerned about technologies that could create some sort of like industry change or upheaval, but the jobs that are closest to the consumer, you're less likely to see significant change or job loss as a result of it. So this was fun when I was creating this presentation for Tri-Cities. Obviously, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but just looking at how cool and unique the Tri-Cities is and what your advantage is, especially compared to the rest of the state. So this is something that definitely should be celebrated. So your minimum wage, well, again, it's still the highest in the nation. You're still not experiencing a near $22 an hour minimum wage. And again, when you have higher minimum wages, that creates wage compression and all the other wages have to rise with it. So you have a reasonable minimum wage starting point, especially for people who are looking for entry-level starting positions or people who are looking for transitional work. And then you guys have the 5.2%, I guess, like average unemployment rate. I'm gonna double check on that fact. I think it's a little old because the report I read from ESD was from this morning for statewide. So apologies on that if that's a little outdated. And then you also have probably one of the most diverse industry job market sectors. You have agriculture, you have healthcare, you do have retail, you do have hospitality, but you have a breadth of industries that help support the local economy. But I do want to say, like, again, while my goal with this presentation is to talk about the state of the retail industry, I do want to make you aware that this doesn't stay contained to the retail industry. You are feeling wage compression, you are feeling hiring issues, you are feeling labor and regulatory impacts. You're also feeling the significant burden of these tax increases, whether it's a brand new tax or an increase to specific B&O taxes or repeals of certain tax exemptions. That none of that stays contained to one singular industry. But I do, again, tying it back to retail as the canary in the coal mine, if you're seeing less people shopping, if you're feeling like you're less likely to go out shopping, if you have less people wanting to go out to eat, on an average Friday night, that is an indicator that the health of the economy needs to be looked at and taken very seriously. It's literally your temp check before a full flu outbreak. This is just a high level at a glance what we're watching for next session. So we're going to have a very high legislative turnover. Right now, we're in a very busy legislative election. All 98 representatives in the House are up for election. That's not unique. But I believe it's like 14 or 15% are going to be brand new lawmakers. That means that these are open seats. Lawmakers who previously retained those seats are not running for those same seats again. And then half the Senate is up for election. And I believe 5 of the 24 seats that are up for election would likely be brand new lawmakers. What that means for you as a business owner is, again, if you're somebody who's like, I don't want to worry about politics, I don't like to get involved in politics, I want to stay out of that, it really does matter your level of involvement in politics and policy. Again, regardless of what side of the aisle you land on, that has a huge impact on what happens to your day-to-day operations and how you're able to work and live in Washington State. We are also watching grocery, or what they call surveillance pricing legislation. We're seeing this pop up across the country. What we are seeing is policy introduced at the state level, but then we're also seeing, similar to minimum wage initiatives at the local level, we're seeing these types of ordinances pop up locally. Seattle, Spokane, Tacoma, Olympia. We are basically playing whack-a-mole both locally, but then also at the state level. Employee monitoring, so how AI or other tech is used to monitor employee performance, and in general, that's being looked at to be regulated. And then obviously, if anybody's looked at the recent economic outlook reports, we are likely to see more tax proposals. They're saying that we're in another budget shortfall, even despite the $9 billion tax increase. So that signals to me that we are likely to see more taxes. We're going to see new taxes. We're going to see increased taxes. And if you are in an industry where you probably have a tax exemption of some sort, you better be on the lookout, because they may be looking at to repeal that. This is where getting involved with your lawmakers is really important. I want to give a big shout out to the chamber. The Tri-Cities Chamber does a phenomenal job when it comes to government affairs advocacy and building that bridge and connection between you as a business owner and lawmakers, but talk to them both at the local level and state level if you can. And then there's just like brief at a glance, your summer to fall checklist, what you can do, both if you're a customer-facing business or even like a broader industry. Price with intention. Make sure that you hire earlier according to your season, just so you can have time to fill those gaps that you need. You want to go ahead and do like your audit and pay classification. We are seeing the salary disclosure, not salary disclosure, but the salary exemption rate rise. So if you make, I think it's like 80,000, is that correct, Anthony? About 80,000. They're not salary exempt. You would have to pay them full time. So make sure that you're in line with that. So doing an audit, and then obviously lean into your local and experiential. You guys have a phenomenal wine and tourism industry. Lean into that. If you have special seasons like festivals or events, make sure that you amplify that for your business. And then obviously find opportunities to be able to compete on your services near the border. All right, questions? I know there's a lot of information.
Hi. You had a stat up there that 70% of retailers in Washington are independent, but I'm wondering what percentage of business that 70% actually makes up.
You mean what do you mean by business?
Like revenue or money
Oh,
brought in?
I would have to look into that further. What I can tell you, the retail industry, retail is, and I say this proudly, is one of the leading, if not leading, economic generators, engines for our state. We pay well over collect and remit 40% of the state's sales tax to both the state and local level. What that breaks out to as far as like the smaller local businesses, I'd have to get a more granular statistic, but I'm happy to follow up with you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Again, Crystal was with the Washington Retail Association. Also, thank you to Anthony Anton of the Washington Hospitality Association for the great talks today. Special appreciation for McKay. Thank you for sponsoring today's luncheon, and to the wonderful staff of the HAPO Center for hosting us. Thank you guys all for being here and for your continued investment in the Tri-City Regional Chamber. With that, we'll close it out and have a good day.